I made a tweet, dare I say, where I called out PC Gamer for what I thought was quite a dishonest and disingenuous post. Now, I'll be real, one of my pet peeves recently has been people that just kind of say stuff to fulfill a narrative, even though it's not technically true. Like, you know, where they're like, oh, but like it's probably true in sentiment, so who cares if it's like literally precisely true. An example would be just earlier we were talking about the Concord beta. I felt last week when people were pointing to the paid beta where you either had to pre-order the game, put $40 up, or you had to be a PlayStation Plus member. I said those player counts and player numbers are not indicative of how the game is actually doing. Wait until the open beta. It may end up, and it turns out it did end up being the case, that the game has like nobody interested in it, even with the open beta. But looking at a paid beta is not fair. Like, and to pretend as though it is the open beta and look, nobody's playing this game. It's like, yeah, only people who played it and chose to engage with the beta are playing it. Like, it's just not fair to do that. So I thought that that was disingenuous and I called it out. And even though I agree with the sentiment that nobody's really interested in Concord, it doesn't change the fact that it's still not accurate to say, right? Hopefully that makes sense. This article was posted by PC Gamer, or rather this article was posted and then a tweet followed it. This article says, according to BioWare, Dragon Age the Veilguard is the first entry in the series, quote, where the combat's actually fun, end quote, and where the characters are, quote, intentionally, end quote, the focus of the storytelling, which seems pretty unfair on the first 3 games. The reason why this stood out to me is I was like, why would they actively talk down their old stuff? Like, that seems a little weird. Just didn't sit right with me. So I pulled up their actual article, and the actual article doesn't actually demonstrate what they're saying. Even though they're pulling quotes for the tweet, it's just not accurate. It's not fair, in my humble opinion. Let me show you why. And you can see people start like engaging with it. 135,000 people saw this. No community, no nothing. And instead just were like, oh, so BioWare says that the first 3 games had, by implication, had unfun gameplay and did not intentionally focus on the storytelling or through the characters. I think that this is what builds this like community of hatred and vitriol around a game for no real reason. Will Dragon Age the Veilguard be great? I have no idea. Will it even be good or okay? I don't really know. I got to see the full first hour of gameplay, and what I saw was pretty interesting. I thought that they demonstrated that they've been cooking. They're really focused on polish, and they're trying to do some things pretty differently. I still have big question marks around it, like the fact that they're not really doing an open world. It's more, it's kind of confusing, but they're like, it's not an open world, but it's also similar to what we've done before. It's just kind of confusing. So I need to see more about the game for sure, but I don't think it's fair to be so dismissive towards it in so many ways as a lot of these outlets have been. And so what I said in response, and I'll show you why once this archive pulls up. This is quite misleading in my opinion. According to your own article, you're quoting Mark Dara, and this is the exact quote in the article that they post, who was a consultant on the game and a former executive producer on the series. So the headline should not say, according to BioWare, Dragon Age the Veilguard is first entry. They're not saying that. It's a consultant and former series producer. That's who's saying this as part of an article discussing the potential for the game and how he thinks it's going to be really good. You can see, again, this is archived, so there's no ad revenue going to them as we scroll down and all this stuff happens. There's no doubt Dara has a history with BioWare and knows about the game, has consulted on it, has discussed all of that. That's totally fine. And nobody's doubting that. But to pretend as though this is BioWare, the company, that's just wrong. It's just not true. And they're not even the ones that did this interview. This was Game Informer. Game Informer did the interview and the article where they discussed all of this stuff. And I mean, you can see that in these other articles from Game Informer who actually talk to the devs and talk to these people, they say stuff like, oh no, we've tried very hard to be respectful of these games, of the previous work. We appreciate the work done by those former devs, but we're trying to differentiate it. We're trying to do storytelling through animation. We're trying to do all these other things while still being respectful of the original stuff. But if you look at the PC Gamer article, how it's phrased and framed, you get the vibe that BioWare like actively detests or dislikes their previous games. And the reason they're doing this is to try and get some rage and hate drummed up from hardcore fans of the old games and trying to get them to hate on this game so that they get more click-throughs and stuff like that. There is plenty of stuff for us to be upset about in the games industry, okay? That's why I think that this is all the more distasteful to me, because there are games and there are projects and there are things done in the industry regularly that should be called out. But those things are amazingly enough, very rarely brought up by outlets like this. And instead, you get manufactured drama like this, or even just outright misleading and misrepresented drama that isn't fair, okay? And even when you're reading the full context of the interview from Mr. Mark Dara, even when you're reading the full interview in the Game Informer post about it, the sentiment is not at all that they dislike the previous games or anything like that. They're talking about like the clunkiness of the combat in like Dragon Age Origins, for example, and how they wanted to improve it and really spend a lot of time and focus on it. The sentiment is not at all that they dislike those previous games. It's just a quote mine trying to further the idea that because this looks different from the other games, they hate the old games. And so if you like those old games, you should be upset about this. And they're just trying to drum up drama and hate for easy engagement. Again, the game could end up sucking. Sure. We don't know because we haven't really seen it. We haven't played it. We don't know much about it. The game could end up being bad. But this is just frankly poor games journalism. It is sloppy. It's trying to manufacture drama for the sake of clicks, and I just find it to be pretty dishonest in my humble opinion. But they're not going to change it. I mean, they're keeping the article the way it is. They might not get access to them. They might not get access as PC Gamer to BioWare. I'm sure they'll still get review codes and all of that, as, I mean, maybe they should. This is just one article that maybe somebody just trying to title it in a dramatic way, put it this way. Or for all we know, maybe this is just a ChatGPT written article where they said, hey, can you analyze this post from Game Informer and then make an article out of it and give us a clickbaity headline, and this is what it generated. Nowadays, you just don't know. You just don't know. But I found this to be particularly frustrating. And we see reflections of it all over the place. There's people that go into these games hell-bent on hating it, and you're like, but why? Like, why do you hate it? And usually when you poke and prod, there's not a legitimate reason other than just, well, I just don't like it, or I'm not impressed with the direction that they've taken or something. And it's all just very, very vague. And it's just because if somebody's an impressionable, like 15-year-old or 13-year-old or something, and then they are just constantly bombarded by articles like this that frame everything as sucking all the time, you shouldn't be surprised when people just sort of regurgitate that and are not even sure why, especially when there's legitimate reasons to potentially be upset about this game or other games. You know, it's just unfortunate that people will point to that stuff. Even with something like AC Shadows, if you're not stoked on Shadows, okay, that's totally fine. Right now, I wouldn't say that I'm stoked on it either. I just haven't seen anything that's really exciting about it. But if you're gonna like say that you want to boycott the game because they're not being historically accurate with Yasuke, like, I think that's a bad reason to be upset about the game. Like, there's plenty of other stuff to point to that's much more legitimate, especially in the context of Assassin's Creed, which has never been historically accurate at all about anything. There's literally a DLC where you fight a god emperor, George Washington, who fights you on a magical pyramid he built in Washington, D.C. Like, it's just a silly thing. Or the other thing was, like, when I got frustrated that people were calling... trying to frame everything around like Suicide Squad, around the design of like Waller and saying that Waller was cringe. I'm like, she is cringe. But there's so many other things. Even if the story was super good, even if like the SBI stuff didn't happen with Suicide Squad, even if all that stuff didn't happen, it's still a bad game, you know? And if we're talking about a video game, we can break it down and tear it apart for those reasons, which are quantifiable and verifiable, where I can point to this and be like, look, there's only 2.5 hours of content stretched over 8 hours. And then all of the DLC expansions, whatever you call them, seasonal updates, all of that is just repeated content. There's nothing new. The game is just bad. I think that's a much more compelling argument to people, because that's going to be true of everybody. There are people that probably love the SBI consultancy stuff and eat it up and want to play games that do have that. But everybody agrees a bad game's a bad game. So if you're trying to make the argument that the game is bad and shouldn't be played, point to the thing that everybody will agree on, that the game is just bad, you know? But going back to all of this stuff, there could be legitimate reasons to be frustrated with Dragon Age the Veilguard's direction, or frustrated with BioWare in general. They've had 2 back-to-back colossal flops, and so it's certainly fair to not trust them when they discuss like quality or polish and stuff like that. That, dare I say, is very, very fair at this point. They have to win you back. You know, at this point, they have to win you back. They're not entitled to your excitement or hype. But that does not mean that you get to just twist words and make things out to be a way that they are not, and do so for the sake of hate clicks and rage farming. So all that to say, I'm just frustrated by it, because this also diminishes the value of actual critiques and criticism surrounding the game. Because now when I see PC Gamer writing an article about something with Dragon Age, the Veilguard, I'm not going to take it anywhere near as seriously, because I'm like, okay, well, now they have a history of actively like farming nonsense to try and get people upset. You guys will remember, I used to pull up PC Gamer regularly and look at their articles for streams and stuff and for videos. I've stopped doing that because they keep doing stuff like this. And so I'm not going to give them the credit or engagement and pull them up and share their articles with my audience, because they keep doing this. And I think everybody else should have the same approach. That's my position. Waller out. He took my thing.